Welcome to Negotiation with Alice, your negotiation podcast. Everything that you do where you need to get on the same page with someone else is a negotiation. So whether you have to negotiate a contract with someone, or you simply need your boss to sign off on that program that you'd like to implement, or you want to figure out how to rebalance the chore structure in your home, or talk about what vacation you want to go on. All of these things are negotiations. So in my podcast, we go over both personal and professional conversations, which all are considered negotiation, and I will give you tips on how to come out ahead. Welcome to the show. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Negotiation with Alice. Today, I have Kevin Thomas here with me today, and we're going to talk about a lot of really fun things. Welcome, Kevin.
Well, yeah, it's great to be on your show. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course, I would love for you to share with our listeners the type of work that you do and who you work with.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background was initially in psychology, and then I went into human resources and got into the whole field of learning and development. And so today I do a lot of work that's sort of at the link between people's personal development and their professional development and all the soft skills that can help people in negotiations and all the other kind of challenging interpersonal situations that arise. And one of the things that I have become trained in and become key to my work is psychodrama, which uses techniques from the theater. It's used primarily in clinical settings as part of like a group psychotherapy or individual psychotherapy, but it has a lot of applications for any challenging interpersonal situation, regardless of the venue. So I'm hoping we're going to get into that.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I love that, Kevin, because I come directly, as my listeners might know, from the theater world. I actually studied acting. So a lot of, my work has role play. So I'd love to hear a bit about how you feel that people should prepare for negotiations using role play. What does that look like? How does that improve their negotiation outcomes? What are your thoughts on that?
Right. Well, let me take acting as kind of a starting point. So with acting, we make a profession out of empathy. So actors are trained to be able to get into a role and understand the world from another person's point of view and really live and inhabit another person's point of view. That's what acting is. The better the actor is, the better they're able to do that. And those exact skills of being able to really get into another person's point of view are very important when it comes to negotiation, because we are going to want to understand the person's interests, their hopes and fears, to understand the kinds of strategies that they have come to use in communication and some of the ups and downs of those. And all of that information can help us get clearer about what we most want and need out of a particular relationship or a negotiation, and the kinds of communication strategies that are going to be most effective for getting those messages across to the other person in a way that will really land for them.
Yeah, so as an actress, I recall like you have to do a lot of like what you were talking about, which is the background of the character, right? And so we spend several hours just really just thinking about the background of the character, and what people don't see is like, oh, do you have siblings? Do you have parents? What's right? Basically, flushing all of that out. So for your clients, when you're coaching them on becoming, better at negotiation, talk a little bit about how much of that background, right, should they be imagining? Is it just what's needed? Do you expect that they flush out like the whole background of maybe the person that they're negotiating against? Like, what do you usually advise people to, how deep should they be going into this background?
Well, I don't ask people to, imagine when they get into the role, like imagine a whole backstory for the person that may or may not be true. What's most important for me is that the people that I'm coaching can get into the body state of the person that they're getting into the role of, to imagine themselves wearing the same clothes, walking the same way that they do, and holding their posture and using the tone of voice and the sort of rhythms of their voice and modulation that they tend to use. All of that really helps, I think. Is the kind of the most important thing for people to warm up to when they're getting into a particular role. And when they do that, then they will be able to intuitively know how the person will respond to, what is said to them in a way that feels genuine and really feels like that person. And very often it can really turn on a lot of light bulbs for people to understand much more about, how that person is feeling and how they're coming at a situation in a way that really deepens the empathic understanding that the person has for the person that they're getting ready to have a difficult conversation of any kind with, including a negotiation.
So basically, to envision, so the first step, from my understanding, is that the first step is really try to envision what kind of person do you want to be in the moment that you're negotiating, right? If you want to be confident, or you want to be genuine, or you want to be friendly, to really envision that and really get into the mindset of that person that you would like to be when you show up to negotiate. Is that sort of step one there?
Well, I think that is really important, but that's something that can happen kind of organically if you're using a role play conversation to prepare for a negotiation. You can just start playing it out, and then at a certain point, I, as the coach, might say, "Time out. Like, let's pretend this person now can't hear you. How do you think this is going? Are you getting what you want out of this conversation? Is it going in the right direction?" And, that gives the person an opportunity to kind of take a step back and think about whether they're showing up in the way that they really want to, in a way that they really feel proud of, or whether they want to make some changes. And then we can just roll back the tape and we can start completely from the beginning, or we can just go back a couple exchanges and try something new and see in vivo how that would actually play out. So it really creates a very embodied learning experience for the person that's preparing for the difficult conversation, because we're not just talking about it as something that's going to happen in the future. We're actually experiencing it in the moment. And you can also experience, you will have the experience of whatever nerves you might be having, or whatever unproductive emotional reactions you might be having that you need to manage. All of that stuff comes out. So it makes it a much more vivid, immersive experience that truly prepares you for the moment when the conversation actually happens.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I really love about role play is that you get actual feedback from your role play partner. And even though you're in an exercise, emotions are always alive, right? Like that's why movies and plays are so fascinating, because you're watching actors, but you believe that they are who they are, experiencing the emotions that they're feeling, because the emotions are real. So if you and I were in a role play and I impacted you a certain way, you could in real time tell me, hey, the way you said that, it's making me feel very uneasy, or it's making me feel upset, right? And so we're getting like real time feedback on the way my presentation to you, or my method of negotiating with you, how it's making you feel in real time.
That's true. And let me share a little bit about what might be a little bit different about how I conduct role plays, where if I'm facilitating a role play for my client, I don't step into that other role at all. I have the person go back and forth between being themselves and being the other person. Because I feel like my client knows that other person better and how they would react in that situation, first of all. But second of all, it gives my client the experience of stepping into the shoes of the person they're going to have a challenging conversation or negotiation with. And that gives them a deeper empathic bond with that person, which helps them to identify communication strategies that are going to create more of a win-win kind of a scenario.
Oh, interesting. So they're basically having like the conversation, they are playing both roles.
That's right. Yes.
That's very
If I am lucky enough to have a third person there, like if I'm doing this in a group or something like that, they they're just teaching the primary person that's actually preparing for the difficult conversation will teach the other person how to play the role. So all the information about that other person is coming from the person that's actually going to be going into that conversation. And just having that other person there means that when I'm looking, I'm not just looking at an empty chair, I'm looking at another person who's temporarily in that role, but I will still step in and go to the other chair and see what that person says in response.
interesting. So they're more of like a visual, like focus point. Is that right?
Yes, I'd say for the most part, when you have people that have a lot of experience playing these kinds of roles, then they will over time develop the ability to sort of intuit who the person is, and they may have an intuitive understanding about how the person would respond, and then they'll have a little bit more freedom to like, react. And, it's up to the person that's facilitating this psychodramatic conversation to know like when to step in and make, because sometimes when somebody starts to invent like who they think the person is, my client might say, well, no, they would never say that. Okay, well, show us, go back into the role and show us what they would say. So yeah.
Right. Interesting.
Hmm.
So, talk to me a little bit more about how my listeners, if they were preparing for either a difficult conversation or some kind of high stakes negotiation, talk them through sort of step by step, since they're not with
Hmm.
you, right?
Right.
They're at home on their own. And you're saying that this is an exercise that they can do on their own to prepare. Talk us a little bit through how they should prepare for this practice and then what things they should be thinking about prior to diving into the exercise.
Okay, yes. So if you were going to do an exercise just solo on your own, a very simple one that you could do would be first to just start walking around in your space as that person would walk, taking on their mannerisms. And then you could sit in an empty chair and you could try to tune in and say, at bottom, what is this person's message to me? And have them say that to the chair where you're going to be sitting. Then you go and back to yourself. You're being yourself again. You're looking at that empty chair where that other person is located. You imagine yourself hearing that message, and then imagine what is your message in response. An exercise like this really helps you get to the heart of exactly what the main thing, the essence of what you want to communicate to the other person is, and to imagine what the essence is of what they want to communicate to you. And that on its own can provide a lot of guidance and orientation that will help you to steer a true path in a difficult conversation.
I love that. That's fantastic. And also talk a little bit about, what happens when people, like for example, I'm a rower, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things that my rowing coach told me was like, I was a little bit nervous before the day of the race.
Hmm.
Actually, the day that I was actually nervous was the day that I was going to be coxing. So
Hmm.
that's when you're making
Yeah,
all the
yeah,
calls. One of the things
yes.
she told me as a coach, and I feel like this is very pertinent to what you're talking about, is to imagine the entire race in my mind,
Hmm.
because your brain doesn't know that whether it's really doing it or not, because it's when you're imagining it, the same neurons are firing. So
Hmm.
talk a bit about how this particular exercise can affect the neurons in the brain and how that can actually propel you to become better once you are in the real negotiation.
Right. Well, one of the things about these kinds of techniques is that with visualization, you're basically closing your eyes, your body is still, and you're imagining yourself doing these things. But with this kind of technique, you're actually bringing it into your body, bringing it into motion so it lands to your nervous system as real. Your brain really will register this as something that is actually happening right now. And I think that is a great way to prepare for, a conversation. It kind of links with the idea that is kind of, I guess it's a little bit older right now, of the power pose, where
Yeah.
you take a physical pose that represents how you want to show up. It might be like a victory pose with your two arms up, or maybe it's one with open arms. If you wanted to have more of an open-hearted connection with somebody, you just choose a pose that represents how you want to show up in that conversation. And again, it's activating our nervous systems are designed to, help us to navigate through physical space in a very concrete way. And when we actually put these things into our body, it lands in our nervous system in a more meaningful and impactful way that will have a more positive impact on what we actually do and say when we're in a difficult situation. So, like, for instance, sometimes people will prepare for a negotiation just by trying to rev themselves up. I'm going to go into the boss's office and I'm going to say this and I'm going to say that and I'm going to demand a raise. And then when they go into the office, then they're all of a sudden they're like sheepish and scared and they don't say any of those things. It's because they haven't actually gotten enough of that into their body where when they go into that actual situation, that they can do something that would be appropriate and meaningful and assertive, and maybe a little bit different from the way that we had fantasized about it when we were just doing it all between our ears.
Right. Well, the other issue I find is if people are just sort of thinking about what I'm going to go in and then do, they're only thinking about 50% of the conversation, which is their half,
Right.
right?
Yes.
And they're
Yeah.
not
So
doing
these,
what your exercise does, which is bring in the empathy piece and bring in the other side's half, because you're having them also envision what does it feel like to be the other person.
right, exactly. And I think that connects with an underlying philosophy, which is we're not just looking out for ourselves, we're looking out for the greater good. And sometimes that requires us to take a very strong, confrontive stance with somebody, but that doesn't mean we're not looking out for the best interests of both parties, when we negotiate.
Right. So, and then going back to this exercise, so how long should they be doing an exercise? Is this a 5 minute exercise? Is this more like a 30-minute exercise? Like, what does that look like if someone were to be doing this on their own without a psychodrama therapist or coach like yourself?
Well, I think the exercise that I described, which I think is really safe for people to do, could be something that you could do in just a few minutes, and you would find that it had a bigger impact. If you wanted to take the next step and go back and forth between two chairs, being yourself and being the other person, and picturing what you would say and what they would say in response, that would be another level that you could take it to. I think that it is important to recognize that these can be very powerful techniques, and depending on the relationship, it may bring up a lot of emotion. And so you need to make sure that you're staying grounded and you're using whatever practices that you have in order to process that emotion so that there's still a psychological safe experience that you're having, not one that's overwhelming or that's going to flood you.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because once you get flooded by lots of emotions, you really aren't able to think through things, and you definitely can't empathize as well, right? Like
That's
that
it.
starts to get blocked.
Yes. hmm Exactly.
Yeah. So people just need to take a deep breath, maybe like walk away from that situation and, calm down. But this has been
hmm
really a fascinating conversation. I have not heard of this type of like methodology. So it's really fascinating to do the role play on your own. Um, you know, Envisioning what it's like to be the other person and being able to empathize with that person, because I think that that gives you more insight into how can you affect the other person if you're at least trying to envision what it's like being them, right?
That's right. And I think these techniques are specifically designed to broaden and deepen people's empathic range, which has a whole host of benefits in any kind of relationship.
Wonderful. And then Kevin, if someone wanted to get in touch with you to work with you, how can they reach you?
You can find me at greenrivercoaching.com, and it is very easy from there to set up a free 30-minute consultation with me. If there's a situation that you think my support could be helpful, we can have a conversation about that. And then after that, I'm happy to come up with some options for a proposal to see if it might be a good fit for us to work together.
Awesome. That's wonderful. And then we will have Kevin's information in the show notes. So, listeners, make sure you check out his information. Thanks again for joining us today, Kevin.
Thank you so much, Alice.
And thank you, listeners, to tuning in to another episode of Negotiation with Alice.